You are standing in what used to be a marketplace. The air tastes like ash and copper. Your feet crunch over glass and spent shell casings that glitter in the dust like scattered stars. Around you, silence, not the peaceful kind. Not the silence of sleep or meditation or sacred spaces where quiet means reverence. This is the silence that follows screaming, the silence that replaces life. Khartoum, Sudan, January 11, 2026. 48 hours ago, this street was alive. Women haggled over lentils and okra, their voices rising and falling in practiced rhythms perfected over decades of bargaining. Children kicked deflated footballs between vendor stalls, their laughter cutting through the heat. Tea sellers poured amber liquid into scratched glasses, the way their fathers had and their fathers before them, a ritual so old it felt eternal. The smell of roasting coffee beans mixed with exhaust fumes and spices. Cardamom, cumin, coriander. The scent of a city that had survived everything history threw at it. Now, nothing moves except smoke, black columns rising from buildings that will never be rebuilt. Ash drifting like snow in a country that has never seen winter. You hear it before you see it. The drone, a mechanical wasp circling overhead, its camera eye searching. You know what comes next. You have seen it before. You have survived it before. The whistle, the impact. The way buildings collapse inward like dying lungs, stone and steel and human bodies compressed into rubble so thoroughly mixed that rescue workers cannot separate the dead from the debris. You run. Your sandals slip on blood-slicked pavement. Your lungs burn with smoke and panic and the terrible understanding that there is nowhere left to run. Every street leads to another ambush. Every alley hides another checkpoint. Every doorway might be your grave, but you run anyway because the alternative is standing still. And standing still in Khartoum means death. Before we descend further into this abyss, I need you to do something for me. Leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from, because what disturbs me most about this story, what keeps me awake, is how few people know it exists. Drop a comment. Let me know this story reached you, that someone somewhere is bearing witness. 150,000 people are dead. Read that number again. 150,000, not soldiers, not combatants, people. Mothers and fathers and children and grandparents and newlyweds and students and shopkeepers and farmers and teachers. Human beings with names and dreams and favorite foods, and inside jokes and morning routines and plans for next week that will never arrive. 12 million people have been forced from their homes. 12 million, that is more than the entire population of Greece, more than Portugal, more than Sweden. Imagine every single person in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Houston, gone, displaced. Refugees in their own country or scattered across borders into camps where tents stretch to the horizon and hope dies a little more each day. 21 million people are starving, not hungry, starving. The kind of starvation where your body begins consuming itself. Where children's bellies swell with fluid while their arms thin to bone. Where mothers produce no milk and watch their babies fade. Where the elderly simply lie down one day and do not rise because there is nothing left inside them to burn. This is the world's largest humanitarian crisis. The fastest displacement catastrophe in recorded history. A war so brutal that journalists who have covered Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, places where horror is measured in decades, describe Sudan with words that crack apart in their mouths. And most of the world has no idea it is happening. This is not an accident. This is not oversight. This is not the fog of war obscuring truth. This is deliberate erasure, calculated silence, the machinery of forgetting operating at industrial scale. Today, we descend into the darkness the media refuses to show you. We will meet women whose names history is already trying to bury. We will understand how two generals transformed a nation into a slaughterhouse. We will trace the flow of gold and weapons and diplomatic cover that keeps the killing machine operational. And we will answer the question no one wants to ask. The question that should haunt every person who learns what is happening in Sudan. Why is the world allowing this? Not why isn't the world doing enough? Why is the world doing nothing? That answer you will not like, but you need to hear it. Because understanding why Sudan is forgotten is understanding how power actually functions. How racism operates in international relations. How economics trumps morality. How complexity becomes an excuse for cowardice. But before we examine the machinery of abandonment, you need to meet someone, you need to know her name, you need to understand what was taken from her. Because statistics are not suffering, numbers are not trauma, 12 million displaced is not a human experience. It is an abstraction. A figure on a UN report that officials read with professional concern before moving to the next agenda item. So let me give you a name. Let me show you one woman, one family, one morning that began like forgettable mornings do, and ended in a way that will never be forgotten by those who survived it. Her name was Amira Hassan, 28 years old. The kind of woman whose hands knew the weight of chalk before they knew the weight of grief. A school teacher in Mistere, a village in western Darfur so small it barely registered on maps. Population 417, 43 families. Most related by blood or marriage, the way villages are when they have existed in the same place for 300 years. She had spent 10 years standing before blackboards, tracing Arabic letters that glowed white against green paint worn smooth by a decade of lessons. Teaching children whose parents could not read to dream of futures their grandparents could not have imagined. She believed in education the way some people believe in God. And with total faith, despite endless evidence that faith alone cannot save you. She was a mother of 3. Hanan, 7 years old, who asked too many questions and wanted to be a doctor because she had once watched Amira bandage a neighbor's wound and decided that healing was the most important thing a person could do. Yusuf, 5, who still believed his father was a hero even though his father had fled to Chad 3 months earlier and sent no money, no word, only silence that Amira had to translate into hope for children too young to understand abandonment. And Aisha, 18 months old, who had just learned to say mama the week before. That single word repeated endlessly, her entire vocabulary, her whole universe compressed into 2 syllables. Amira woke before sunrise on June 3, 2024, as she had every morning for 10 years. She prayed Fajr while her children slept, her forehead pressed to a worn prayer mat that had belonged to her grandmother, asking Allah for protection she believed would be granted because she had done nothing to deserve otherwise. She prepared breakfast. Full medames, the way her grandmother had taught her. Fava beans cooked until soft, mashed with olive oil and cumin, served with flatbread still warm from the clay oven in her courtyard. The smell filled the small house. Comfort in a bowl, tradition in a recipe. She braided Hanan's hair while the girl complained, as she did every morning, that the braids were too tight. That school was boring, that she wanted to stay home and help with Aisha. Amira's fingers moved with the muscle memory of 5,000 mornings, weaving 3 strands into patterns her own mother had woven into her hair, generational knowledge transmitted through touch. She told Hanan the same thing she told her every morning. Education is freedom. Knowledge is power. You will not spend your life in this village. You will see the world. She had no idea that within 6 hours Hanan would be dead. The RSF arrived at 7:14 in the morning. 17 vehicles, pickup trucks with machine guns mounted in the beds, 63 fighters. They did not announce themselves with words. They did not knock on doors or issue warnings or provide any of the formalities that even the cruelest armies once observed. They announced themselves with fire. The first shots killed Khalil, Amira's neighbor. A woman who had delivered babies for 30 years, whose hands had welcomed 263 children into the world, including Hanan, including Yusuf, including Aisha. who knew every family in the village, who attended every wedding and funeral, who settled disputes and arranged marriages and taught young mothers how to swaddle infants. She died in her doorway, holding bread she had been bringing to share with Amira's family. The bullets entered her chest. 3 of them, she was dead before her body reached the ground. The bread landed beside her, scattering crumbs across dust that would soon be soaked with blood. Amira heard the gunfire, that sound. Once you hear automatic weapons fire, you never forget it. Your body remembers even when your mind tries to suppress the memory. She grabbed her children, no time to think, no time to plan, only animal instinct screaming run, run, run. Hanan 7, Yusuf 5. Aisha, 18 months, still nursing, who did not understand why her mother was suddenly screaming, suddenly running, why the morning that had been filled with food and braids and ordinary complaints had transformed into chaos. The RSF had a system. They always had a system. This was not random violence. This was choreographed terror, perfected over years of practice in dozens of villages across Darfur. First, kill the men, any male over 15, shoot them in the streets, in their homes, in front of their families. Do not arrest, do not interrogate, do not waste time with questions. Just kill, establish dominance, remove resistance, ensure that survivors understand no one is coming to save them. Second, separate the women, young from old, fertile from barren, useful from disposable. The elderly are eliminated quickly. Efficiency matters, bodies accumulate. The young are sorted by age, health, beauty. In criteria calculated to maximize their value as commodities in a market that has existed for as long as war itself. Third, begin the work, the real work. The work that will destroy not just bodies but spirits. The work that will ensure survivors never forget what happened. The work that will serve as warning to other villages. Resistance is futile, obedience is survival, silence is mandatory. Amira tried to hide. She gathered her children and ran to a neighbor's compound, where 8 other women had already taken shelter, praying that stone walls and locked doors might protect them, that God might hear their desperate whispers. That somehow, despite everything they had heard about the RSF, despite the stories refugees told in camps across the border, despite the warnings that had been whispered for months, somehow they might be spared. They were not spared. The fighters kicked open the door. Heavy boots against old wood, the sound of splintering, the smell of gun oil and sweat and something else. A smell Amira could not identify then but would never forget. The smell of men who have been killing for hours, a metallic scent. Iron and adrenaline and something chemical. Fear or rage or both, pheromones of violence. They separated the women by age, the elderly. 5 women who had lived through droughts and famines and the first Darfur genocide in 2003, who thought they had survived the worst history could offer, were forced outside at gunpoint. What happened to them, the survivors refused to describe in detail. They say only that the screaming stopped after 20 minutes. They say the RSF made the younger women listen, made them understand that mercy was not an option, that age would not protect you, that nothing would protect you, the younger women, including Amira. The RSF had other plans. She watched them take her daughter, Hanan, 7 years old. Braids still perfect from her mother's hands that morning, woven tight, woven with love, woven with the assumption that the day would be ordinary. That the biggest problem would be multiplication tables or spelling tests or playground disputes. Amira screamed, she fought, words failed her, language collapsed into animal sounds, guttural, primal. The sound a mother makes when her child is being taken, and every instinct in her body is screaming protect, 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 but her body cannot move because a rifle butt has just struck her face. She felt teeth break, 2 of them. Front teeth that had been perfectly straight, that she had been proud of in a vain way she confessed only to herself. Felt them crack and loosen and fill her mouth with blood, tasted copper, tasted bone fragments. The world spun, vision blurred. Ears rang with a high-pitched whine that would persist for months when her vision cleared. Hanan was being dragged toward a truck, small hands clawing at the dirt, feet kicking uselessly, screaming for her mother in a voice that would haunt Amira for the rest of her life. A sound she would hear in her sleep, in her waking moments, in the gaps between heartbeats, forever. Amira lunged forward, blood streaming from her mouth, visions swimming. She had no plan, no strategy, only the biological imperative to reach her child. To place her body between her daughter and harm, to do what mothers have done since the first mother existed. A gunshot, not at Amira, at Yusuf, her 5-year-old son, standing between his mother and the fighters, his small body attempting to be a shield. Arms spread wide in an instinctive mimicry of protection he had seen in his mother, in his absent father, in stories told around fires about heroes and warriors and men who stood against evil. The bullet entered his chest, small caliber, designed for efficiency, not drama. It did its work quickly, his heart, a fist-sized organ that had beaten for 5 years, that had pumped blood through growing limbs, that had accelerated with excitement when he played and slowed with contentment when he slept. Stopped. Immediately, no final words. No dramatic death scene, just a small body falling into dust that would soon be saturated with his blood. He was dead before he hit the ground. Amira does not remember the next 3 hours clearly. Trauma fragments memory. Psychologists call it dissociation. The mind's desperate attempt to survive what the body cannot escape. The brain shuts down non-essential functions, severs the connection between experience and processing, records events without experiencing them, allows you to be present and absent simultaneously. It is not weakness. It is the most sophisticated survival mechanism evolution has produced. She remembers the truck bed, metal burning hot under the midday sun, temperatures in Darfur in June reaching 110, 115 degrees Fahrenheit, metal conducting heat until it blisters skin on contact. Other women pressed against her, bodies packed like cargo, like livestock. The comparison is not metaphorical. They were being transported as commodities. She remembers baby Aisha wailing, trying to nurse. Amira's body producing nothing. Stress stops lactation within hours. A biological response that dooms infants when mothers are traumatized. Aisha's cries growing weaker, throat raw, lips cracking in the heat. 18 months old, still needed milk, still needed her mother's body to survive, and her mother's body was shutting down. She remembers arriving at the RSF camp, makeshift. Tents and shipping containers arranged in the desert 30 kilometers from any village. No roads leading there, no landmarks, just emptiness in all directions. A place designed to be impossible to escape. A place where screams carry only to sand and sky. Dozens of women were already there. Some from Mistere, most from other places. Dozens of villages across Darfur experiencing identical horrors simultaneously. A coordinated campaign, not random violence, not opportunistic assault. Industrial-scale sexual violence deployed as military strategy. She remembers a commander, young, could not have been older than 25, sunglasses hiding his eyes. Keffieh wrapped around his face against the dust, walking among the women like a farmer inspecting livestock at market, pointing, separating, this one, that one, her, decisions made in seconds. Lives altered forever based on evaluations that took less time than choosing what to eat for breakfast. She remembers being taken to a shipping container, the door closing, the lock sliding into place with a metallic click that meant finality, darkness, heat that made breathing difficult, air thick and stale, the smell of previous occupants, urine, feces, blood, sweat, fear. All the fluids the human body produces under extreme duress, layered over months until the container was saturated with suffering. And she remembers what happened when the door opened again. I will not describe what they did to her, not because it is too graphic for this video. Though it is not because YouTube's guidelines prohibit it, though they do. But because Amira, if she is still alive somewhere in Chad, in a refugee camp where 750,000 displaced Sudanese are warehoused and forgotten, she does not deserve to have the worst moments of her life narrated for an audience. She does not deserve to have her trauma converted into content. She deserves dignity. Even now, especially now, what I will tell you is what the United Nations confirmed in their October 2024 report, what Human Rights Watch documented, what Amnesty International verified through hundreds of interviews with survivors who escaped and found their way to investigators who were willing to listen. The RSF is systematically using sexual violence as a weapon of war, not opportunistic assault, not individual crimes by undisciplined soldiers. Systematic, organized policy, orders issued from command structure, rewards provided for compliance, punishments issued for hesitation. Women and girls are being held in camps across Darfur and Kordofan. Hundreds of camps, perhaps thousands. No one knows the exact number because access is blocked. Aid organizations cannot enter, journalists cannot enter, UN observers cannot enter. Only survivors who escape can tell us what is happening, and many survivors do not escape. They remain months, years. However long the RSF decides their utility continues, rape is not a side effect of war, it is the strategy, the goal, the weapon deployed deliberately to achieve specific military objectives: terror, submission, ethnic cleansing, biological warfare. Impregnating women with the children of their attackers, destroying ethnic identity, ensuring that even if they survive, they carry the trauma in their bodies forever. The UN documented 1,237 specific cases in a 6-month period. 1,237 women and girls willing to speak to investigators, willing to relive trauma for the possibility that someone somewhere might care enough to stop it. Human Rights Watch believes the real number is 10 times higher: 12,000 victims in 6 months. 24,000 in a year. These numbers are conservative, likely severe undercounts, because most victims cannot reach investigators, because most victims are still in captivity, because most victims will never speak about what happened to them. Victims range from 8 years old to 73. The RSF does not discriminate. Age is irrelevant. Beauty is irrelevant. What matters is that you are female, that you belong to the wrong ethnic group, that your suffering sends a message to anyone who might consider resistance. Some are released after days, some after weeks, some are never released. They become what the RSF calls sabia, a term borrowed from ISIS. War spoils property, slaves, women held indefinitely, moved from camp to camp as fighters rotate, passed between men like currency, used, discarded, replaced. The few women who escape tell consistent stories, multiple perpetrators, daily violence. Starvation used as control, beatings used as punishment, pregnancies forced, babies born in captivity, babies taken away immediately, babies killed, mothers destroyed by loss compounded on loss until there is nothing left except the biological functions that keep the body breathing. And threats, always threats. If you speak about this, we will find your family. If you testify, we will hunt you. If you run, we will catch you, and what we do to you next will make what happened before seem merciful. The threats continue even after escape. The RSF has networks in refugee camps, informants, collaborators, women who survived but were broken enough to serve their captors even in freedom. Survival creates impossible choices. Moral judgments are luxuries afforded only to those who have never faced them. 4 months after her capture, Amira escaped. Not through resistance or rescue. The RSF simply abandoned the camp. They had extracted what they wanted. Terror, submission, broken women who would serve as warnings to others. They moved to new battlefields, new villages, new victims. The shipping containers were left unlocked. The women who could still walked, those who could not, remained to die or survive on their own. The RSF did not care which. Amira walked for 6 days across desert, no food. The camp had kept them malnourished deliberately. Weak women do not run, she carried Aisha. 18 months old, no longer nursing, no milk to give, the baby's cries had stopped days earlier. Energy conservation, the body shutting down non-essential functions. On the 3rd day, Aisha died, in her mother's arms, dehydration, malnutrition, perhaps disease, perhaps trauma. The human body can only endure so much, baby bodies even less. Amira buried her daughter in sand with her bare hands, no tools, no marker, no prayers spoken aloud because her voice had stopped working. Just a shallow depression in desert that wind would erase within hours. She placed Aisha's body in the hole, covered it with sand, stood for a moment, then walked. She crossed into Chad on September 19, 2024. A refugee now, stateless, carrying nothing, not even her daughter's body, not even memories that made sense, just fragments, sounds, smells. The feeling of Hanan's hair in her hands that final morning, the sound of Yusuf's last breath, Aisha's weight growing lighter each day until it was gone. She is one of 3.8 million Sudanese refugees, one of 12 million displaced, one of 21 million facing starvation, one of 150,000 women who have experienced sexual violence in this war. She is, according to the statistics, lucky she survived. But when humanitarian workers interviewed her in the camp, International Rescue Committee caseworkers who document testimonies for reports that will be read by officials who will express concern and do nothing, she said something that was recorded in their files. A statement so stark it stopped the interview. She said, "I am not alive. I am the space where Hanan and Yusuf and Aisha used to be. I am their absence. I am the silence after their voices stopped. And absence does not need food or water or shelter. Absence does not feel cold or heat or pain. Absence just continues empty. Waiting for nothing, because nothing is all that remains." The caseworker noted in the file that Amira refused further food assistance after that interview. She is alive as of this recording, but the caseworker is not optimistic. Amira's story is not unique, it is not exceptional. It is the pattern repeated in hundreds of villages. Thousands of women, tens of thousands of children. This is not one horror, this is systematic horror. Industrial-scale horror, horror as policy. And the RSF is not the only perpetrator because in this war, there are no heroes. Only varying degrees of monstrosity. Only systems of violence competing to see which can cause more suffering before the world finally pays attention. Let me show you the other side. The Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, the legitimate government, the side that Western nations still recognize diplomatically. The side that holds Sudan's UN seat, the side that presents itself as defenders of stability and order. They do not commit genocide in the methodical way the RSF does. They do not operate rape camps. They do not systematically target ethnic groups for elimination. Their atrocities are called something else. Collateral damage, unfortunate necessities, the price of war, strategic operations, proportionate response. What they do is bomb civilians daily, with jets provided by foreign allies, with drones provided by Iran, with artillery shells manufactured in Serbia and China and smuggled through Egypt. Khartoum has been under bombardment for 1,000 days. 2 million people, trapped between two armies who use the city as their battlefield. No evacuation routes, no safe corridors. No possibility of escape because the airport was destroyed in the first week and the roads are controlled by whichever faction happens to dominate that particular checkpoint on that particular day. The SAF bombs markets, they bomb hospitals, they bomb schools, they bomb residential neighborhoods. They say they are targeting RSF positions. The corpses extracted from rubble are 90% civilian. Women, children, elderly, people who had no affiliation with either side, people whose only crime was existing in the wrong place when jets screamed overhead. In December 2024, SAF forces besieged the city of Wad Madani. Population 500,000, they cut off food supplies, cut off water, cut off medicine, cut off electricity for 11 weeks. Starve the city until the RSF surrenders it. That was the strategy. The RSF did not surrender. They withdrew and left civilians to face the consequences. When international observers finally gained access in March 2025, they found mass graves, 372 bodies in a field outside the city. Children, their bellies swollen with the fluid that accompanies extreme starvation. Their limbs reduced to bone wrapped in skin. Medical examiners determined they had died over a period of weeks. Slowly, in agony, families told investigators they had eaten everything. Grain stores exhausted in the first month, then leather, boiled and chewed until it was digestible, then tree bark. Stripped from whatever trees existed in the region, pounded into paste, consumed for the fibrous bulk even though it provided no nutrition. Then insects, locusts, beetles, anything that moved, then grass, which caused intestinal blockage and killed some faster than starvation would have. And then, nothing. You watch your children die. You hold them as their bodies shut down. You promise them food is coming, help is coming, someone will save them, and you know you are lying. And they know you are lying, but you say it anyway because what else is there to say? The SAF calls this strategic pressure. The UN calls it using starvation as a weapon of war, which is a war crime under the Geneva Convention's Article 54, which carries no penalty because the Security Council is blocked, because Russia and China veto any accountability measure. Because the international criminal justice system only functions when powerful nations allow it to function. And like the RSF, the SAF does not fight alone. They are funded and armed and diplomatically protected by foreign powers who profit from chaos. Egypt provides weapons, tanks, artillery, ammunition. Egypt wants a stable puppet on their southern border, a government they can control, a buffer against instability. Sudan matters to Egypt not because of humanitarian concern, but because Egypt's population depends on Nile water and Sudan controls Nile headwaters. Iran provides drones, the same drones Russia uses in Ukraine. The same technology that has made modern warfare so terrifyingly efficient. Loitering munitions that circle target areas for hours, then strike with precision. Operated remotely. Pilots sitting in air-conditioned rooms hundreds of kilometers away, watching thermal feeds, pressing buttons, erasing families without experiencing blood or screaming or the smell of burning flesh. Russia provides diplomatic cover. At the UN Security Council, they veto sanctions. They block arms embargoes. They prevent intervention. Not because they care about Sudan, but because they oppose Western influence everywhere always as a geopolitical principle. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Sudanese civilians are acceptable collateral in a larger game, and the result is deadlock, stalemate, two armies locked in conflict neither can win. Both willing to burn Sudan to ash rather than surrender, both convinced that victory is possible if they just keep killing. But this war is not about victory. This war is about profit, for everyone except the Sudanese people. Let me show you the machinery behind the slaughter. The economic systems that convert human suffering into financial gain. Sudan possesses some of Africa's richest gold deposits, billions of dollars in precious metals buried in Darfur's hills. For decades, these mines produced wealth that enriched dictators while populations starved. When al-Bashir fell, the question became, who controls the gold? The RSF controls most mining areas now. Gold is extracted by slave labor, men and boys forced into tunnels that collapse regularly. No safety equipment, no medical care, no payment beyond minimal food to keep them functional. Children as young as 9 work 12-hour shifts underground because their small bodies can navigate narrow shafts adult bodies cannot. When workers die, and they die constantly, they are buried in the mines. No ceremony, no notification to families. just bodies covered with rubble and new workers sent down the next day. The gold extracted through this system leaves Darfur in RSF-controlled trucks, crosses into Libya, which is itself a failed state controlled by warlords who ask no questions as long as they receive their cut, flies to Dubai on private jets, arrives at refineries that do not inquire about origin, enters the global market clean, legitimate, untraceable. A 2023 investigation by The Sentry, an organization that tracks conflict financing, documented the exact route. They named the specific refineries. They identified the shell companies. They traced the financial networks. They presented evidence to international authorities. Nothing happened because the United Arab Emirates is a crucial Western ally, home to major financial centers, arms purchaser, diplomatic partner. Sanctioning the UAE for blood gold would be inconvenient. It would disrupt relationships that serve Western interests. It would anger a government that hosts American military bases and purchases billions in weapons and invests trillions in Western markets. So officials express concern, issue statements, impose sanctions on a few individuals whose bank accounts were already secured elsewhere. And the gold keeps flowing, the money keeps returning, the weapons keep arriving. The RSF has evolved from a ragtag militia into a conventional army. They have artillery now, anti-aircraft systems, organized supply chains, professional command structure. They are not rebels anymore. They are a parallel state with its own government, its own economy, its own foreign relations. In December 2025, the RSF announced the formation of a government of peace and unity based in Nyala, southern Sudan. They appointed ministers, issued proclamations, began collecting taxes in territories they control. The international community has not recognized this government, but they have not rejected it either. They are watching, waiting, calculating whether recognition might serve their interests. Meanwhile, the SAF funds itself through Sudan's oil infrastructure. What remains of it? Most oil fields are in the south, near the border with South Sudan, which itself seceded in 2011 after decades of civil war. Production has collapsed, facilities bombed, workers fled, but some oil still flows, enough to fund a military that grows stronger even as the country collapses. Egypt and Iran provide credit, loans that will be repaid in oil and political influence when the war ends. If it ends, Egypt wants a puppet. Iran wants a foothold in Africa. Both are willing to finance mass murder to achieve their goals, China observes. They built much of Sudan's infrastructure before the war. Highways, dams, oil pipelines, all of it now destroyed or inoperable, but China is patient. They take the long view, they know wars end. And when this one does, whoever controls Sudan will need to rebuild. China will offer loans, favorable terms, diplomatic support, and they will own Sudan's future the way they own infrastructure in dozens of African nations drowning in debt they can never repay. This is the machinery. This is how war becomes profitable, how suffering converts into currency, how bodies become commodities in markets that never sleep. And the Sudanese people, the 48 million civilians watching their country collapse, they are not players in this game. They are not even pawns. Pawns have strategic value. Pawns can be sacrificed for advantage. The Sudanese people are the board the game is played on. They are the terrain, the medium, the background. They die and no one recalculates strategy. They starve and no one adjusts projections. They flee and no one counts them except in statistics that officials will read with professional concern before moving to the next agenda item. As of January 11, 2026, day 1000 of the war, here is the situation. The RSF controls Western Sudan. All 5 Darfur states, parts of Kordofan, most of Khartoum. They captured the strategic city of Al-Fashir in October 2025 after a 500-day siege. 500 days, more than a year. Imagine your city under siege for 500 days, no food entering, no medicine, no supplies. Just bombardment and starvation and slow death. When Al-Fashir finally fell, the RSF massacred survivors. Not all of them, that would be inefficient. They selected targets, men of fighting age, community leaders, anyone who might organize resistance. They killed them in the streets, in front of families. Methods designed to maximize trauma. There are videos, filmed by RSF fighters on their phones, posted to social media, deleted within hours but preserved by investigators, videos of executions, of bodies piled in squares, of fighters celebrating over corpses. They are proud, they want people to see. They want the message to spread. Resistance is futile, obedience is survival. The SAF controls eastern Sudan, the Red Sea coast, Port Sudan, which now serves as the temporary capital. They hold the international airport, the weapons depots, the government buildings that still function, and between them, millions of civilians trapped, unable to flee because borders are closed or overwhelmed. Chad cannot absorb more refugees. South Sudan cannot. Egypt has sealed its border. Ethiopia is dealing with its own conflicts. Refugee camps are at capacity. Aid organizations are underfunded. The UN requested $2.7 billion for Sudan in 2025. Donors provided 27%, less than one-third, not because the need was unclear, not because the evidence was insufficient, but because donor fatigue, because Ukraine demands resources, because Gaza demands attention, because Western taxpayers do not care about Sudan and politicians respond to what taxpayers care about. Since April 2023, 150,000 confirmed dead. The real number is certainly higher, likely double, perhaps triple. No one knows because large areas are inaccessible, because bodies are buried without documentation, because families cannot reach hospitals to report deaths, because death has become so common it is no longer counted reliably. 12 million displaced, the largest displacement crisis on Earth, larger than Syria at its peak, larger than Afghanistan, larger than any single crisis in modern history. 12 million people who had homes and jobs and routines and favorite cafes and family dinners and wedding plans and college applications and hopes. All of it erased. 21 million facing acute food insecurity. Not hunger, not poverty, acute food insecurity. A technical term that means you do not know if you will eat today or tomorrow or next week. That means your children are malnourished. That means you are making decisions about which child gets the food because there is not enough for all of them. 33.7 million needing humanitarian assistance. That is 70% of Sudan's population. 7 out of 10 people require outside help to survive. This is not a crisis. This is state collapse. This is a nation dying while the world watches, but these numbers. They fail to capture the specific horrors, the individual traumas, the moments that define what this war actually means for people experiencing it. Let me give you one example, one small window into what these statistics represent when they are happening to actual human beings. In North Darfur, medical workers have documented a phenomenon they had never encountered before. Children with a condition they call starvation edema. The body, deprived of protein for extended periods, begins cannibalizing itself. Muscle tissue breaks down, organs start failing. But the abdomen swells with fluid as the body desperately attempts to maintain blood pressure. The result is grotesque. Children who look healthy, bellies round and full, but when you touch them, the skin is paper-thin, bones visible beneath. They are dying, but they look like they are surviving. Aid workers call them ghost children. Present but already gone, walking corpses who will collapse within days or weeks. There is no treatment in most areas, no IV fluids, no protein supplements, no medical facilities still functioning. So workers document the cases, add them to reports, and watch them die. North Darfur has documented over 30,000 cases of severe acute malnutrition in children under 5. The actual number is likely triple that, perhaps quadruple. Most areas are inaccessible to humanitarian organizations. Both the RSF and SAF block aid convoys. Sometimes they claim security concerns. Sometimes they deny passage for bureaucratic reasons. Sometimes they simply say no and provide no explanation. They use starvation as a weapon, deliberately, calculatedly. They want populations too weak to resist, too desperate to organize, too focused on survival to consider rebellion. This is not ancient history. This is not medieval barbarism that we have evolved beyond. This is happening right now. Today, January 11th, 2026. As you listen to these words, children in Sudan are dying from starvation while the world possesses enough food to feed them 10 times over. The question is not capability. The world has the resources, the logistics, the technology. We can deliver food to war zones. We have done it before. We do it currently in other conflicts. The question is will, and will does not exist, not because officials are evil. Not because they want children to starve, but because saving Sudan offers no political advantage. It generates no favorable headlines. It costs capital with allies who profit from the war continuing. So Sudan dies quietly while the world argues about other things. While newspapers print front-page stories about celebrity divorces and sports scandals and political theater. While social media debates trivial controversies and algorithmic outrage. While people scroll past suffering that is invisible because no one with power wants it to be seen. Here is the question that should haunt every person listening to this. Why is the world doing nothing? Not why isn't the world doing enough? Not why is response inadequate? Why is the world doing nothing? Because that is accurate, that is honest, nothing. Oh, there are UN reports, strongly worded statements issued from New York headquarters, calls for all parties to respect international humanitarian law and protect civilians and allow humanitarian access. Language so bureaucratic it could describe any conflict anywhere. Copy-paste condemnation that costs nothing and accomplishes less. But actual intervention. Sanctions that matter, pressure on the UAE to stop arming the RSF, pressure on Egypt and Iran to stop arming the SAF, consequences for war crimes, accountability for genocide, nothing. Let me explain the machinery of abandonment, the systems that convert tragedy into indifference. The reasons why some conflicts receive immediate response while others are ignored until it is too late to matter. First, geographic invisibility. Sudan is landlocked, Central Africa, no oil infrastructure that threatens global markets. What oil exists is already disrupted. No strategic waterways. No territory that matters to Western powers' immediate interests. It matters to the people who live there, to the 48 million civilians whose lives are being destroyed. But to Western capitals calculating costs and benefits, expendable. Compare Ukraine, European nation, white population, border with NATO. Russian aggression threatening Western security architecture. Response was immediate, billions in aid, weapons, training, diplomatic support, sanctions so severe they fractured the global economy. Sudan received. Concern, second, racial invisibility. I need to state this clearly even though it is uncomfortable. When white Europeans are threatened, Western response is immediate. When brown Middle Eastern people suffer, response is conditional, dependent on whether the victims align with Western interests. When black Africans die, the pattern is undeniable. The racism is structural, not individual hatred, structural indifference. Systems built over centuries that value some lives more than others. Rwanda, 800,000 dead in 100 days. The fastest genocide in modern history. The world watched, did nothing, sent no troops, imposed no intervention. Allowed machetes to erase a population while officials debated whether it technically qualified as genocide. As if semantics mattered while bodies piled in churches. Sudan is Rwanda in slow motion, same continent, same racial dynamics, same international paralysis disguised as complexity. Third, Narrative invisibility. Ukraine has a clear story. Democratic nation invaded by authoritarian neighbor. David versus Goliath. Freedom versus tyranny. Simple, Gaza has a clear story even if people disagree about who the heroes and villains are. The narrative exists, media knows how to frame it. Sudan has two military factions fighting each other, both committing atrocities, multiple foreign backers, tribal dynamics, religious elements, historical grievances dating back decades. Complex. Western media does not know how to package complexity into 3-minute segments, so they do not try. They cover conflicts that fit their templates. Sudan does not fit. Fourth, economic invisibility. The UAE is a crucial Western ally. Dubai is a global financial center. The Emirates purchase billions in Western weapons, host Western military bases, invest trillions in Western markets. Sanctioning the UAE for arming the RSF would disrupt relationships that serve powerful interests. It would anger a government that matters to the functioning of global capitalism. So officials know the UAE is arming the RSF. They have intelligence confirming it, investigations documenting it, satellite imagery showing it. And they do nothing because doing something would cost more than doing nothing. The United States has imposed sanctions on a handful of individuals. Europe has done the same, but these are symbolic. They target people whose assets were already moved to secure jurisdictions. They do not stop the flow of weapons. They do not stop the flow of gold. They are performative, designed to allow officials to say we did something when asked why they are not doing more. Russia and China block anything stronger at the UN Security Council. Not because they care about Sudan. Russia does not have significant interests in Sudan beyond opposing Western intervention anywhere, always, as geopolitical principle. China has economic interests but would prefer stability over chaos. They block because the Security Council has become a theater where great powers perform their rivalries. Sudan is a prop, the result, paralysis, gridlock, inaction dressed up as diplomatic complexity, a system designed to prevent action rather than facilitate it, and while diplomats debate procedure, the dying continues. Let me be even more specific. Here is what the world could do right now, today. These are not impossible demands. These are achievable interventions that would save hundreds of thousands of lives. Impose a no-fly zone over Sudan. SAF airstrikes would end immediately. Drones would be grounded. Bombardment of civilian areas would stop. This is technologically simple. The United States possesses the capability. Europe possesses the capability. Enforcing it would require no ground troops, no occupation, just air superiority, cost minimal compared to other military operations. Risk low. Neither the SAF nor RSF possess air defenses that could threaten modern Western jets. Why doesn't it happen? Because it would set a precedent. It would suggest that Western powers will intervene to protect African civilians. And powerful people do not want that precedent. They want intervention to remain conditional, selective, based on interests, not principles. Sanction UAE banks that process RSF gold, freeze accounts, seize assets. Make it prohibitively expensive to handle conflict minerals. The UAE would comply immediately. They need access to Western financial systems more than they need RSF gold. Why doesn't it happen? Because sanctioning the UAE would anger a government that purchases Western weapons, hosts Western bases, and invests in Western companies. The cost to Western interests would exceed the benefit to Sudanese civilians. Expand humanitarian corridors. Force both sides to allow food and medicine through, deploy international monitors to ensure compliance, threaten sanctions for violations. This has worked in other conflicts. Syria, Yemen, when pressure is applied, corridors open. Why doesn't it happen? Because both the RSF and SAF want to control aid. They want populations dependent on their goodwill. They weaponize humanitarian assistance. And the international community lacks the will to challenge them. Fund the UN appeal fully. $2.7 billion. That is less than 0.1% of Western military budgets. Less than the cost of a single aircraft carrier. It would save millions of lives. Why doesn't it happen? Because donor fatigue. Because taxpayers in wealthy nations do not care about Sudan. Because politicians respond to what taxpayers care about. And taxpayers care about inflation and gas prices and immigration and culture wars and celebrity scandals. Not distant conflicts involving people they will never meet. The tools exist. The mechanisms exist. The resources exist. What does not exist is political will, and political will does not materialize spontaneously. It is created through pressure, through activism, through people demanding that their governments act, but there is no pressure, no protests, no hashtags trending, no celebrities posting solidarity messages, no politicians making speeches. Sudan is invisible. And invisible suffering generates no response. So here is what happens next. Day 1001, day 1050, day 2000, the war continues, the dying continues, and the world continues not caring. Let me show you what 2027 might look like if nothing changes. The RSF captures Kordofan completely, controls 60% of Sudan's territory, the most fertile agricultural land, the gold mines. They consolidate control, establish institutions, declare independence from Khartoum. The international community faces a choice: recognize them or don't. Either way, Sudan is partitioned. Either way, millions die in the transition. Either way, the Horn of Africa destabilizes further. Or, the SAF launches a final offensive to retake Khartoum. Total war, urban warfare, 2 million civilians trapped in the deadliest battle since World War II. Khartoum becomes what Aleppo was, what Mosul was, what Mariupol was. A name that becomes synonymous with apocalypse. And the world watches, expresses concern, does nothing, or, and this is what terrifies analysts most. One side uses chemical weapons. Sudan has stockpiles from the Bashir era. Chlorine, sarin, mustard gas, both sides have access. Both sides are desperate enough. The threshold has not been crossed yet, but it is visible on the horizon, and when it is crossed, the world will express shock, outrage, horror, and then it will do nothing, again, because that is the pattern. That is what history teaches. In 50 years, archaeologists will excavate mass graves across Sudan. They will find tens of thousands of bodies, women, children, entire families buried together in pits that were bulldozed closed after being filled. They will carbon date the remains to 2023 through 2027. They will write papers, hold conferences, build memorials, museums will create exhibits, textbooks will include paragraphs, and people will ask, how did the world let this happen? The answer is already written, the same way it always has: indifference, calculation, cowardice. The same mechanisms that allowed Rwanda, that allowed Bosnia, that allowed Cambodia, that allowed the Holocaust to continue for years before intervention. Power acts only when action serves power. Morality is rhetoric applied selectively, discarded when inconvenient. The difference is, we are living through it now. We are the people who will be asked, where were you? And we will have to answer. Will your answer be, I did not know? That excuse worked in previous generations when information was controlled. When news was filtered through gatekeepers who could choose what to report and what to suppress. But you cannot claim ignorance now. You are listening to this. You know the information is available, the evidence is documented, the horror is undeniable. Your ignorance, if you choose it after this, is willful, and willful ignorance is complicity. So what will your answer be? I knew but I did nothing. That is honest, at least. Most people will say that. Most people always do, because doing something requires effort, risk, sacrifice. Caring about strangers you will never meet, and most people do not. Or will your answer be, I tried? That is something, not enough to save Sudan. Individual actions will not stop this war, but something is not nothing, and the accumulation of somethings sometimes changes outcomes. Her name was Amira Hassan. She was not a statistic. She was not collateral damage. She was a school teacher who believed education could save her community, who braided her daughter's hair every morning with hands that knew how to shape love into practical gestures, who survived hell only to become a refugee living in a tent, waiting for a world that has forgotten her. Her daughter Hanan was 7 years old. She loved mathematics. She wanted to be a doctor. She asked too many questions. She is dead. Her son Yusuf was 5. He tried to protect his mother, his small body attempting to be a shield. He is dead. Her daughter Aisha was 18 months old. She died in her mother's arms in the desert. She is dead. They are 3 among 150,000, 3 names among millions displaced. 3 stories among countless others that will never be told because no one with power wants to hear them. Fatima Ahmed, 34 years old, teacher, raped by RSF fighters, survived, now in a refugee camp in Chad. Mariam Osman, 16 years old, captured during a raid on her village. Held for 6 months, escaped, pregnant, suicidal. Zahara Ibrahim, 41 years old, lost her entire family in an airstrike, wanders the ruins of Khartoum searching for bodies to bury, finding none because the rubble is too deep. These women did not choose to become warnings. They did not choose to become martyrs. They did not choose to become symbols of international failure. They chose only to survive, to wake up each morning and try again, to find food, to protect children, to maintain dignity when every system designed to strip it away. And the world chose to let them die, not actively, not through malice, through indifference, which is worse because malice can be confronted. Indifference is harder to fight. It requires forcing people to care, and you cannot force someone to care. But you can make it impossible to look away. You can break the silence. You can share their stories, you can speak their names, you can force the media to cover what it has been ignoring. You can pressure governments to act. You can donate to organizations working in Sudan. You can do something. These actions will not stop the war overnight, but they are not nothing, because the opposite of atrocity is not rescue, it is witnessing. Remembering, refusing to let victims become invisible, making their suffering so undeniable that indifference becomes impossible. There is a phrase in Arabic. Shahid, it means witness. It also means martyr. The words are the same because witnessing is a form of sacrifice. It requires carrying the weight of what you have seen, living with knowledge you cannot unknow, bearing responsibility you cannot escape. If you have listened this far, you are a witness now. You know what is happening in Sudan. You cannot unknow it. The images in your mind cannot be erased. The names I have spoken cannot be unheard. You carry this now. The question is what you will do with it. Amira Hassan. If she is still alive, she is living in a refugee camp in eastern Chad, surrounded by 773,000 other people the world has forgotten. She is waiting, not for rescue. She stopped believing in rescue months ago, not for justice. She understands the world does not provide justice to people like her, just for anyone to acknowledge that she exists, that her children existed, that their lives mattered. That their deaths were not just numbers in a report that officials skimmed before moving to the next agenda item. I have given you their names. I have shown you their suffering. I have explained the systems that allow it to continue. I have made it impossible for you to claim ignorance. Now the question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you share this video? Will you speak about Sudan? Will you force conversations that people would prefer to avoid? Will you pressure your government to act? Will you donate to organizations providing aid? Will you make Sudan visible when every system is designed to keep it hidden? Or will you scroll past, close this tab, return to whatever you were doing before, forget these names within a day or a week? Let them disappear back into the invisibility that has swallowed Sudan for 1,000 days. The choice is yours. I cannot make it for you, no one can, but I can tell you this. In 50 years, when someone asks what you did when the world's worst humanitarian crisis was happening, Your answer will depend on what you choose now, today, in this moment. Darkness only wins when we stop lighting candles, and I am not done lighting candles yet. If you believe the forgotten deserve to be remembered, if you believe silence is complicity, if you believe that witnessing is the first step toward justice, then subscribe to Grimoryx, turn on notifications. These stories will continue, because someone has to tell them, someone has to remember. Someone has to refuse to look away, and maybe that someone is you. In Khartoum, before the war, there was a tradition on the anniversary of the 2019 revolution, the day the people believed they had finally won freedom. Families would light candles in their windows, one candle for every person who had died fighting for that freedom. The entire city would glow, thousands of small flames against the darkness. A promise made in wax and fire. We remember, we will not forget. Their sacrifice mattered. The last time this happened was April 2023, days before the war began, before hope collapsed into horror, before revolution became massacre. Since then, there has been no light, only darkness, smoke where candles used to burn, ruins where windows used to glow, but darkness is not permanent. It never has been. Every revolution that succeeded was preceded by darkness that felt eternal. Every atrocity that ended was ended by people who refused to accept that darkness was inevitable, who lit candles when lighting candles was dangerous, who spoke names when speaking was forbidden, who witnessed when witnessing required courage. Sudan's darkness can end, not through wishful thinking, not through thoughts and prayers mumbled from safe distance, but through action, pressure, solidarity, witness that refuses to be silent. The women of Sudan are not asking for your pity. Pity is useless. Pity changes nothing. They are asking for your attention, your voice, your refusal to look away. They are asking you to remember their names, to speak them aloud, to make their suffering so undeniable that the world cannot continue ignoring it. Let me give you their names one more time. Speak them with me if you can, let them be heard. Amira Hassan, teacher, survivor, waiting in a camp in Chad for a world that has forgotten her. Hanan, 7 years old, wanted to be a doctor, loved mathematics, asked too many questions, taken by the RSF, dead. Yusuf, 5 years old, tried to protect his mother, shot in the chest, dead. Aisha, 18 months old, first word was mama, died of dehydration in her mother's arms, dead. Fatima Ahmed, 34, teacher, raped, survived, living in a tent with no future visible. Mariam Osman, 16, held captive for 6 months, pregnant from rape, suicidal, alive only because she has not yet found the means. Zahara Ibrahim, 41, lost husband, 3 children, both parents in a single airstrike. Wanders ruins searching for bodies to bury, finding none because rubble is too deep. Khalil, midwife, delivered 263 babies over 30 years. Shot in her doorway holding bread she was bringing to share. First victim of Mystere, dead. These are 8 names. 8 among 150,000 dead. 8 among 12 million displaced. 8 among millions whose names we will never know because no one recorded them. Because they died in places journalists cannot reach. Because their families are dead or scattered or too traumatized to speak. But these 8, I have given you their names, you know them now. You cannot unknow them, they are yours to carry. The question is what you will do with them. Here is what you can do, right now, today. These are not impossible demands. These are actionable steps that matter. Share this video. Force the algorithm to recognize that people care about Sudan. Make it trend. Make it unavoidable. Break the silence that has allowed this crisis to continue for 1,000 days. Donate to organizations working on the ground. The International Rescue Committee. They operate in Sudan and refugee camps across the border. Doctors Without Borders. They provide medical care in conditions that are nearly impossible. The UN Refugee Agency. They coordinate assistance for millions of displaced people. Your money reaches real people, buys food, medicine, shelter, saves lives. Contact your government representatives. Call them, email them, demand they sanction the UAE. Demand they expand humanitarian corridors. Demand they impose a no-fly zone. Demand they fund the UN appeal fully. Politicians respond to pressure. Create pressure. Talk about Sudan with family, friends, co-workers. Post about it. Do not let it disappear from conversation. Do not let the world move on while the dying continues. Be annoying if necessary. Be persistent. Make people uncomfortable with their ignorance. These actions will not stop the war tomorrow. Individual efforts rarely change outcomes immediately, but accumulated efforts, sustained pressure. Refusal to accept the unacceptable. That has ended atrocities before. That is how Rwanda's genocide finally provoked intervention, how Bosnia's siege ended, how public outrage forced action when institutions failed. It requires enough people caring, enough people refusing to look away. Enough people deciding that Sudanese lives matter as much as any other lives. That Black African suffering deserves the same response as white European suffering. That complexity is not an excuse for inaction. Are you enough people? I cannot answer that. Only you can, only the collective you. Everyone listening to this, you can determine whether this matters enough to act, but I can tell you what happens if you do nothing. The war continues. The dying continues. In 50 years, museums will have exhibits, textbooks will have paragraphs. And people will ask, how did we let this happen? And your answer, if you do nothing now, will be, I knew, I was told, I understood, and I chose to do nothing because it was easier than doing something. That is honest, at least. Most people will say that, most people always do, but you do not have to be most people. You can be the person who shared the video that made someone else care. You can be the person who donated money that fed a family for a week. You can be the person who called a representative who had never heard of Sudan and forced them to learn. You can be the person who refused to scroll past, who refused to forget, who refused to accept that some suffering is inevitable and some lives are expendable. In Khartoum, candles are not burning anymore, but you can light one, a metaphorical candle, the candle of witness, of remembering, of refusing to participate in erasure. Amira Hassan is waiting, not for rescue. She stopped believing in rescue, but for acknowledgement, for someone to say, I see you, you exist, your children existed, their lives mattered, their deaths were not just statistics. I have said it, I have seen her, I have spoken her children's names, and now you have heard them. The witnessing has occurred. The memory is created. The silence is broken. The question is whether you will carry that memory forward, whether you will speak those names to others, whether you will refuse to let them be forgotten again, if you believe the forgotten deserve to be remembered. If you believe silence is complicity, if you believe that bearing witness is the first step toward justice, then subscribe to Grimoryx, turn on notifications, share this video, comment below, tell me you were here, tell me you witnessed, tell me you will not forget. Because these stories will continue. As long as atrocities continue, I will document them. As long as victims are erased, I will speak their names. As long as the world looks away, I will force it to look. Darkness only wins when we stop lighting candles. And I am not done lighting candles yet, are you?